If we were to rent it to multiple businesses, obviously we've then got communal kitchen areas and communal toilet areas. Is there different responsibilities as a landlord if you rent it to multiple businesses as opposed to a single business?
Only from the point of view that because you've created the communal areas, you'll be responsible for putting the arrangements in place and managing it. You can't rely on them behaving because you've created that communal space. You'll have the duty to make sure that the tenants are aware of what the rules are and somehow trying to enforce it.
Okay, what if it's a single business occupied the area? Would they then be responsible themselves for that community?
Yeah, if you've got a single business in there, then they're responsible for the area that they occupy. But where you've got shared facilities, then it normally comes back to the landlord or the managing agent from both the health and safety point of view, a fire safety point of view, and also the COVID perspective.
How do I plan for staff to walk from their car to the entrance of our business?
That is, in theory, a relatively simple process, but ultimately comes down to where they're parking their car. If they're parking in Ipswich, for example, at Crown Car Parks or on Turret Lane, and there's a fair distance to walk, there's not a great deal you can do about it. If they're parking within your own parking areas, it's reminding staff that they've just got to maintain that 2-metre rule. So if they pull in next to each other and they get out of their car is providing them with the 2 metres. It's not about joining up and walking in as you used to do. It's not about holding doors open for people. We've got to go through a very long and laborious system, and it's going to be new for people at shutting doors in people's faces. The whole point being we have to maintain that 2 metres. So it's a simple case. They stay away from each other until they're in the building. Then it's hand sanitising, be it washing hands or using a hand sanitizer that's outside the door, depending on your premises. And then from that point onwards, it's back to normal processes of maintaining the 2-metre rule throughout the building and avoiding physical contact.
From a documentational point of view, our communication with our staff is quite frequent and regular following our COVID meetings. Is that documentation and those correspondence to our staff at all levels, is that adequate to satisfy the health and safety requirements that we've firstly had the meetings, that we've communicated well to our staff what our steps are and measures are, and we've put those actions in place? Is that going to be enough, or do we need to keep a more formal file of our activities and so on?
Well, I think Ashley can answer the more kind of technical query about is it enough to satisfy the health and safety executive. I think from my point of view as a director, firstly, I would want to see that all in one place anyway. It's going to be much easier in terms of you as a committee being able to recall what you said and when you said it, if you ever need to. So I think good housekeeping to keep, create a COVID-19 file so that you've got your normal, from a risk assessment point of view, you've got your normal risk assessment register, but you've actually got a COVID-19 file that shows your modified risk assessments or the risk assessments that you've reviewed and the decisions that you've made. So I think a separate file is good housekeeping, just from a document recall point of view. Is it enough? I think my answer as a director at this stage would be, we don't know, because it hasn't been tested. There isn't any test cases out there yet. And I think I'd probably default to a kind of maybe an overly used phrase at the moment, is that, you need to use your common sense, basically. To a large extent, who are we satisfying? Are we satisfying the health and safety executive? Probably unlikely, unless, and we'll touch on this later on, unless, something happens significantly and you get on their radar screen. Are you satisfying your insurance companies? Possibly, because they may start asking questions in the future if they receive claims. Can you show us what you did? Can you show us the decisions that you made? What audit trail have you got available? But I think above all, it's there really to satisfy your management team and your staff. If someone asks a question, you've got a consistent file of resource to answer those questions, to increase everybody's confidence in you as a business, that you're doing the right things at the right time for the benefit of individuals and the business. So, from my point of view as a director, that's probably the most overriding reason for doing it.
From a legal perspective, There is, as with anything health and safety, there is no black and white. If you're a really small organisation, say you've got less than 10 people in, which obviously you wouldn't have for your size of business if you've got a committee in place. If you've got 10 people and you happen to be keeping it in a pocket diary and walking around with it, that would be acceptable to the enforcers. The larger you are, the more you've got to be able to prove that you're doing things. If you're smaller, it's a lot simpler. I would tend to take the common sense approach, as Tim has said, because realistically, that's what we're looking at in this current situation. There's no case law. It's unlikely there'll be any case law in reality. Are you confident that if I walked into your workplace, walked up to 2 or 3 of your members of staff and asked them, are you being communicated with regards to the current COVID-19 issues and how the business is dealing with it, would they say yes to me?
Expectation in terms of risk assessment for someone working from home around things like security, laptop protection, Wi-Fi?
Yeah, well, that's a whole we could probably devote a whole webinar on home risk assessment. I think the reality is that for a lot of businesses now, we're probably past the point where you could reasonably argue that working from home is temporary. If you're a temporary worker from home, the guidelines are a little bit more relaxed in terms of what we need to do for kind of assessments in the home. Obviously, once we're past that stage where you can't reasonably argue that it's temporary anymore, we do need to do enhanced assessments in terms of the workers' needs. In terms of health and safety, that's more the kind of ergonomics and the well-being element, how you set their home working station up, what you need to provide as an employer to satisfy your duty of care. When we start looking at security of Wi-Fi, policies of protecting laptops, really that takes us away from HR and more into what are your HR policies, what's your company policy on data protection. So that's a slightly different field, but the reality is it is, you know, to coin a phrase, it is a minefield as we move to the majority of people working from home. And I think, you know, as you'll hear from us later on, if you're an office-based environment, and we are, Park City is an office-based environment, although our service model takes us to our clients on a regular basis, it's going to be very difficult for any office-based environment at this point to justify going back to work, because the guidance is very specific. If you can work from home, you should.
In terms of security and things like broadband, from a risk assessment point of view, the reality is Suffolk is not known for its high quality broadband. So if you're looking at it purely from that perspective, there will be some staff who just don't have a broadband connection that will work for them for working from home, in which case those staff can be asked to come back to the office to work, just from a common sense perspective. Because remember, the government's advice is if you can work from home, you must. If you haven't got a broadband connection that's capable of handling what you need to do, and there are plenty of people out there who haven't got it, then they're not going to be able to work from home. So they are going to come into the office. Security side of things, that's just down to normal insurance. So people might need to just check with their insurer that they're covered, but generally they tend to be.
Do you think we'll get to a situation, therefore, going forward, that we'll be self-certifying that our workspace at home is secure and fits the policy that our company expects to deliver? I'm thinking of things like GDPR, etc., with stuff lying around on workspaces, which of course has always been the case. But if everyone's going to be 80% of people are going to work from home going forward, it's something that perhaps we have paid scant regard to in the past. Now we're going to have to pay absolute regard to.
Yeah, I think the reality is, I can't remember exactly. I'm sure there's some information on the Data Commissioner's website about that. Sorry, the Information Commissioner's website about that. They're taking a rather pragmatic approach to it, in the fact that if you're forced to work from home, then people probably will see the paperwork. But if you have a look on the Information Commissioner's website, that'll give you more guidance on what to do.
So we have traditionally done face-to-face meetings with individual support or group work. And clearly we haven't been able to do that recently. We've been working remotely over the phone and various IT software systems. But many of our participants and learners are losing confidence and having mental health issues, obviously due to the current situation. And there's a growing feeling that more personal contact with them would give them better support. And I'm just wondering what your advice would be about the must work from home issue, because clearly we can, but we're not giving the best support necessarily that we can to particular individuals.
You are going to have to work from home until the government decide what they're going to do with people who are in our situation, who work as either consultants, true office workers, or that deal with members of the public like yourselves. It's going to be difficult because there are no true safe arrangements at the minute. Technically, they shouldn't really be meeting with you either. If you go into the guidance, yes, it says that they can meet with one person from a different household, but if you do that, you're only going to see one of your clients a day. And the risk factor posed by being in what could be a relatively confined space with them outweighs any real benefit. And I can appreciate the issues around the well-being and the mental health issues. I know from speaking to people in Mind, they've seen an uptake in the services that they offer to people. Equally, other groups are in the same boat. But at the minute, that sort of thing, not wishing to sort of like lower the value of what's going on in either the group that I'm going to use as an example or yourselves, but hairdressers can't get into a position where they're talking to people or dealing with them in a close perspective. Beauty technicians can't do the same thing. We can't do that. It might be at some later stage the government have worked out how they're going to get that sort of thing back in place, but for the time being, it's unfortunately stuck in that situation of trying to find technological means of dealing with your client group, which is going to be difficult because many of them might not even have the appropriate facilities to do what you need to do.
Yeah, I think I can appreciate, Jane, it is frustrating because again, if you default to the guidance, 3.4 does give businesses that are on the permitted to return to work list, it does give them specific guidance on how to manage meetings at work. And again, one of the ones that jumped out of the page is that, a pretty simple solution, but you hold a meeting outdoors, you recognise the 2 metre distancing, and that minimises the potential risk. And it's still risk assessment led. But again, if you can't justify a return to work because you can work from home, that's where technically it becomes difficult. But I would have thought, there's got to be advice within your kind of industry body in terms of how you can manage that.
I just have a question that we've been asked quite often by our members who are concerned about communal areas and in particular kitchens, and with people touching fridges, kettles, toasters, microwaves, things like that. And we've actually been asked, should they close their kitchen? Should they say people shouldn't use them? And what an uproar that might be if people don't have their cup of tea in the morning, that kind of thing. What would you advise?
Right. Firstly, you've got the workplace health, safety and welfare regulations. People need to have access to drinks and they need to have access to somewhere to prepare food. So there isn't really an option of closing them. You could try and do it through risk assessment, but I can be virtually guaranteed, as you said, there will be uproar and people will be contacting the enforcers. There's no real way around it other than ensuring that your cleaning regimes are in place and that if somebody goes into the kitchen, they have to learn to clean it when they come out again. And that is going to be a very difficult thing to enforce, and it's going to need somebody to enforce it because they've got to make sure that they're cleaning it on a regular basis. One of the things I've been advising clients is to make it quite clear that the kitchen is not to be used for hand washing, which is something that's quite new. It's basically coming out of food hygiene legislation. I'm cheating and moving it across because it helps to improve your biosecurity arrangements. If people aren't washing their hands in the kitchen, it's limiting the possibility that the infection is going to be in there in the first place on the surfaces. So if people want to go make a drink, they head off to the loos, wash their hands, get them nice and clean, then go and make a drink. Otherwise, you're potentially going to have somebody going into your kitchens every hour to give it a good clean over as an attempt to try and bring it under control. So you need to look at it, and it's something that will need to be looked at. And it's going to be very difficult where employers share facilities. As you said, it's communal areas. So you could be sharing your building with other organisations. the building managers, the building owners have to put things in place that everybody else can follow. They can't, unfortunate term, wash their hands of the problem. They've got to manage it because they're responsible for communal areas.
If you look in the guidance, they know this is an issue. I mean, they have tried to touch on it. One, there's very specific guidance about canteens and social kind of eating areas. And the way they've tried to mitigate that is to say you should encourage your staff to bring their own food to work. Then if you are still creating a canteen area for them to eat rather than at their desk, you've then got to go into the social distancing and cleaning regime. So that's one element. The other element, just to add to the complexity of what you need to manage, and again, if you've got a large kind of workforce, this will be more problematic. But they're also saying that staff should be encouraged not to leave the premises at lunchtime. Because see, what you're doing there is you're losing control in terms of where they're going and what they're doing, and then they're coming back into the workplace. Now, obviously, outside of work hours, you haven't got control of that anyway. But obviously, whilst they're at work, you've got a duty of care. So again, if you look at the guidance, and that's why, you know, even if you can't find your sector on those guidance documents, the 8 areas that we said, download them anyway. 80% of the information is consistent across each of the sectors, and you will find statements in there that you can fold into your return to work plan to cover elements of canteen facilities and how to approach kind of break time in inverted commas.